Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, aka Recaptain America, and this video we're breaking down What If Episode 2. The new Marvel show is filled to the brim with Easter eggs, hidden details, and things you missed that we'll be dissecting throughout this video. The episode itself asks the question, what if TChalla was picked up by Yondu, and it features one of the final performances by Chadwick Boseman. Boseman, of course, sadly passed away in 2020, and this feels like a fitting send-off for not only the actor, but also the character that he played. It's filled with positivity, and also the message that one person can make a massive difference. Now, it has been confirmed that Chadwick will be featuring in 4 What If episodes in total. We know that there's going to be 9 in the season, so he will be back for the majority of episodes, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing him return. Now, we start off with the title sequence from last week, which we broke down in our last video, just in case you want to see what's going on with it. However, we get an added section with the Watcher talking about how space itself is filled with the multiverse, where we see lights, he sees worlds, and this idea of all the universes existing at once was actually shown at the start of Loki episode 6 when we pulled out of our universe and travelled into a parallel one. Often when the multiverse is depicted in comics, it's literally worlds alongside each other, so I love how there's this idea that you can travel to a parallel dimension if you journey far enough. The Watcher ponders whether your destiny is determined by your nature, or if your nature is determined by your destiny. The entry does wrestle back and forth between this question, but it shows how T'Challa's kindness has changed the universe for the better. Now, this episode heavily pulls from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, and whereas that movie opened on Earth 1988, here we pick up immediately on Morag. Putting the scene from Guardians and this one side by side, we can see that the coordinates are exactly the same, with the planet's placement starting with a J and then a long list of numbers that probably ends in 69. Now, I was hoping it was going to be one number off to show that it was a parallel Morag, but no, just waste Kevin Spoiler's time comparing screenshots for nothing. Now, there are hints early on that this isn't Star-Lord, and the eyes on the character's helmet are purple rather than red. His jacket is also dark purple and gold, which are of course colours associated with T'Challa and the Black Panther. When T'Challa reveals his face, we can also see that the jacket has markings on it, which are similar to the necklaces that the Black Panther suit comes out of. Both he and Peter Quill pull the Power Stone orb out through the use of a magnet, and as we learned in the first Avenger, it's dangerous for people to touch an Infinity Stone with their bare hands. At the end of the Avengers, Bruce Banner used prongs, and even in Infinity War, when Strange handed over the Time Stone, he used his powers to pass it over rather than holding it directly. Just like Guardians, Star-Lord is confronted by Korath, but rather than having no clue who Peter Quill is, he's a massive fan of T'Challa. We learn that T'Challa is a Robin Hood figure that takes power from the powerful and gives it to the powerless. Korath kneels before him, and T'Challa says that isn't necessary, which is a nod to Infinity War, in which Bruce Banner went to bow and he said we don't do that here. Korath is completely enamored by him, and he says that he's a lord, which T'Challa says isn't an official title. This completely juxtaposes how people were with Star-Lord, and they made fun of his nickname and didn't take him seriously. It even got to the point that when he was taken prisoner by the Xandarians, that they listed his name as Space Lord instead of the real one. See kids, you get all the good details here like that. Now, Korath wants to fight Star-Lord so that he can brag about facing off against him, and though the former easily bests him, it's hilarious how Korath gets knocked out with a smile on his face. T'Challa uses the magnets to propel the soldiers against the wall, and this is very similar to the kinetic blasts that he had in his Black Panther suit. Interestingly, Quill completely disintegrated them, whereas T'Challa just knocks them out, showing the difference between the two as the latter is non-lethal. He travels outside where he comes face to face with several soldiers, and he says a Ravager never flies solo, to which Yondu arrives. In Guardians, Quill of course went off from the Ravagers to do this mission by himself, and he was against Yondu for the majority of the movie. Yondu says in the old days they would have sold it to the highest bidder, and in Guardians, Quill of course went to that dude with the funny eyebrows with his shop. I went there once and eyebrowsed myself, So fun's all around. Now instead, they want to restart a dying star in order to save the Kalorian system. It shows that it's not for personal gain and that they'd rather be doing things for the benefit of the universe. This is likely why Thanos joins up with Star-Lord, as though he was a genocidal maniac, in his head he was a hero that was doing things in the universe's best interests. Now, because Peter Quill wasn't picked up, a lot of things change. Thanos ended up working with T'Challa because he made a difference, and thus he didn't team up with Ronan to hunt down the orb. Korath still ends up being one of Ronan's underlings, but because he's not working for Thanos, Gamora isn't sent after Peter and thus they never meet. Now because T'Challa wasn't against Yondu, he wasn't on the run, and thus Rocket and Groot don't try and claim the bounty on his head. I know a lot of you were saying last week that the Captain Carter episode was pretty much just the first Avenger in a Peggy Carter skin, but this episode really diverts from the original Guardians. Peter's ship swoops in, and we can see the paint jobs being changed to purple and gold, further reflecting T'Challa's colour scheme. That ship was called the Milano, namely after Alyssa Milano, an actress that Peter probably fancied whilst he still lived on Earth. Bit before my time, I was actually more of a pink Power Rangers kind of guy, but moving on. Now the ship was replaced by the Benatar, but as neither of these names mean anything to T'Challa, he instead calls it the Mandela after Nelson Mandela. Interestingly, the Mandela effect deals with the notion of false memories in which someone recalls something different to how it actually happened. The condition gained its name because many people came forward and said that they remembered Nelson Mandela dying in the 80s, even though he passed away in 2013. There have been other examples of this, such as people believing that Shaq was in a movie called Shazam, when it was actually Kazam. Now many have theorized that people with these so-called false memories have actually moved into alternate dimensions without knowing it. This lends itself to what if, as we are watching alternate timelines play out in which there are different outcomes. So the name Mandela holds not only meaning because of the famous South African president that T'Challa might have looked up to, but because of the idea that we are watching an alternate history play out in which Kevin's spoilers never changed his name from definition. We see the Watcher in the sky gazing over them taking off, and these characters first appeared in the MCU during Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which links closely to this property. From here we journey to Earth, Wakanda 1988, which slightly changes things up to how Peter was introduced in what was just Earth 1988. T'Challa is fed up of living in a bubble, which we of course know from the MCU is what Wakanda is actually located within. His father appears in his Black Panther suit, which looks exactly like how it did in the opening of Black Panther. That took place in 1992, and we don't really see what happened to Killmonger. The series actually looks like it might let us revisit some characters, and this episode does end with a cliffhanger that could open some possibilities for the future. We know that Captain Carter will be popping up in Doctor Strange 2, and the What If trailer showed her actually meeting the Doc. So potentially these stories could carry on, and I'd love to see what happened with Killmonger on the opposite side of this. Now one night T'Challa runs into the wild throwing his spear, and upon leaving the bubble he comes face to face with a Ravager ship. We learn that they have been tasked with getting Quill for Ego, but that Yondu outsourced this to his subordinates Taserface and Kraglin, who is voiced by Sean Gunn. Sean Gunn is actually James Gunn's brother, and he too did the mocap work for Rocket during Guardians and the Avengers films. Also, Taserface is... what an idiot. His name's Taserface, what a moron. Now it turns out that they were scanning for something that wasn't on Earth, and the Vibranium asteroid is what made them go to Wakanda. T'Challa isn't freaked out by the ship because he of course comes from a technologically advanced society that probably uploads what if breakdowns before the episode even airs. Now rather than taking him back, they decide to take T'Challa with them, and it proves to be the right decision as the galaxy is living in a time of peace. Turns out Yondu lied to T'Challa and told him that Wakanda was destroyed, which is why he hasn't come back. When Guardians came out, I know a lot of people couldn't understand why Quill didn't ever go back to Earth, but that was the place where his mother died, and it's very rare that people return to a place filled with trauma that gave them the worst day of their lives. Unless that place is the channel Heavy Spoilers, which is doing what if breakdowns every week. Now if you want to stay locked into those breakdowns, then please smash the thumbs up button so YouTube knows to recommend them to you, or you know what, just subscribe and join the crew. Do both and I'll give you the superpower to survive dying the death of cringe from the worst dad jokes on the internet, exclusively on this channel. Exclusive. Now Korath asked T'Challa several questions, including how he managed to stop Thanos from wiping out half of all life in the universe, and we find out that your boy just gave him a good counter argument. See Thor, you don't need to chop his head off, you just need to get people to cancel him on Twitter until he admits he's wrong and apologizes. Thanos says his plan was not without its merits, and we do hear him going through the workings of it later on in the episode. Now because he was never hell-bent on wiping out half of all life in the universe, Ronan never killed Drax's family whilst he was working for him. Instead, T'Challa actually helped to fend off the Kree invasion, a race that Ronan is a part of, and apparently Drax takes a selfie of himself and Star-Lord to send to his family. Now I say apparently because I couldn't actually see Drax anywhere in this episode, but according to the subtitles, apparently he was talking in a scene. I didn't catch him. Now Thanos giving up his destiny means that he also didn't invade Gamora's planet and take her as his daughter. Because he never pushed Gamora and Nebula to fight one another, the latter is a normal woman now with luscious blonde hair instead of her skinhead. She still talks like this, talks like Nebula. I'm gonna thumbs up the video and also make sure to subscribe because Nebula. Now Nebula has had a pretty rough childhood still though, and she warns T'Challa not to let her father know that the orb holds an Infinity Stone. T'Challa rebuffs this by saying he's changed and that he gardens now, which is of course what he retired to do after completing the snap in Infinity War. Turns out Nebula has a job for Star-Lord which involves getting some cosmic dust known as the Embers of Genesis, which terraforms a planet and heals it. However, the person that has it is the Collector, and from this point out the episode turns into a heist mission. I love how Thanos and Nebula refer to their relationship as being adoptive, which is of course similar to Thor and Loki, who refused to acknowledge that they were relatives when things were bad. Yondu doesn't want to do it, and he brings up the Robin Hood code T'Challa has, but he calls it Robin Leech. Yondu of course broke the Ravager code in Guardians by abducting kids, and it was only after his noble sacrifice that his name was acknowledged as being one of them. The Collector still resides on Nowhere, but we learn that he's now working with the Black Order, who Thanos warns are bad news. Thanos of course hired them to carry out his genocidal plan, and amongst these we see Corvus Glaive, Cull Obsidian, Proxima Midnight, and also Ebony Maw, who all featured in Infinity War and Endgame. Interestingly, in the comics, the Black Order was known as Cull Obsidian, and Cull Obsidian was known as Black Dwarf, which is a little bit of trivia for you there. The Collector's slave Karina greets them much like how she did with the Guardians, and we see the plan play out with them posing as sellers. Korath and Thanos throw a distraction outside by having a fight, and inside T'Challa searches for the embers amongst the Collector's collection. Now the Collector is completely bulked up, like he's been hitting the Captain Carter diet, and this is probably because he's now the most powerful person in the universe. Amongst his collection we can see Cosmo the space dog from the first Guardians movie, and he's also someone that appeared in the comics. Cosmo is based on the real life dog Laika, which the Soviets sent into space in order to test what the effects of the journey would have on the body. There's also a Dark Elf from Thor the Dark World, and these of course could be seen in the live action version amongst the Collector's wears and tears. We also come face to face with Howard the Duck, who is voiced by Seth Green. He gives T'Challa directions that include the Frost Giants and also the Cronins, which is the species that Korg comes from. The directions are too complicated though, and T'Challa frees him, to which he says, "You know what they say, you're out of luck until you've gone duck." This was actually said by the character in Guardians 2 when he was trying to impress Ryan Ares' mom. Ho ho ho, gotcha you sucker. Now Howard goes into the bar, which we can see is very similar to the one that Valkyrie was at in Ragnarok. The bartender looks pretty much the same. I think this design might have been based on a Celestial, but that's still to be disputed in the comments below. Definitely argue about that, yeah, because it helps the algorithm and means I get more views and more money. I want to be rich, bitch. Now the distraction is discovered and things go into lockdown, which makes T'Challa run through the Collector's hangar. Here we can see the Benatar, the Grandmaster's party ship, a Xandarian starship, and what may be an X-Wing. Ronin's cruisers, which Korath arrived in, are seen from the opening of Guardians, and also the indestructible dock ships that appeared in the same film. However, the one that makes T'Challa stop is the Royal Talon fighter, which comes from Wakanda. He opens it up to find mannequins wearing the Dora Milaje garb, and they carry a message from his father, who's been searching for him this entire time. Now they do a bit of a bait and switch where it seems like Nebula has double crossed them, but it's actually all part of the plan. It turns out the Collector has a blank spot for him on his wall, but he's disappointed to learn that he's not a Superman who can fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes. Thus he wants him dissected, but Nebula arrives and frees the Ravagers by shooting Corvus Glaive through the chest. This sort of mirrors how the character died in Infinity War when he was stabbed through it, and it's sort of like poetry. The joke's getting terrible. Now it turns out that Nebula, yeah, she wanted to clear her debt with the Collector while stealing the embers. T'Challa breaks free from his cage by using his vibranium necklace, and though Ebony Maw almost kills him, he's shot in the back by Karina. Not an Easter egg. Now Karina is inspired by T'Challa saying how history doesn't look kindly on those that lock people in cages, and she decides to join him. She was very much a slave to the Collector, and in Guardians she ended up unleashing the Power Stone in order to escape. T'Challa goes to flee and the Collector hits him with a Cronin arm, which he potentially got from Korg. Rest in peace Korg, yeah? If that is Korg, rest in peace. A rolling stone gathers no moss, and I love you. Now the Collector also brings forth his weapon collection. That includes a dagger forged from dark matter, which belonged to the ruler of the Dark Elves. There's also Captain America's shield and Mjolnir, which means that the Collector probably beat the Avengers at some point. Heck, he's even beaten the goddess of death Hela, who was the villainess from Ragnarok. Because her powers were linked to Asgard, and the fact that he's got Thor's hammer, I actually think that he might have destroyed the location in this timeline. Now the Ravagers run, but Thanos gets a Hulk moment, and turns around to say he's not crazy, he's mad. Thanos was of course referred to as the Mad Titan, and he goes toe to toe with Cull Obsidian. Him blocking the hammer looks a lot like the moment in Infinity War when Spider-Man did the same thing in Central Park. He is however blindsided by Proxima Midnight, and Nebula ends up returning to save her father from his fate. Nebula puts some embers into Cull's mouth, and this sprouts forth a giant beanstalk similar to Jack and the Beanstalk. This transforms Nowhere from a dead head into a luscious green environment and lets us know what benefits that the embers will have. Now when all seems lost, T'Challa says a Ravager never flies solo, and Yondu arrives to help out. Together they beat the Collector by freeing all of his collection, and this leaves him in a similar situation to his brother the Grandmaster. In the post-credit scene of Ragnarok, he was of course surrounded by the people he'd oppressed for years, so it's a nice little nod to that movie. In the Talon ship, T'Challa and Yondu escape, and we can see that they also have Cosmo. T'Challa returns to Wakanda, and here he finds his father, Ramonda and Shuri. The Ravagers sit and enjoy some Wakandan hospitality, and Kraglin talks about jump points and how they make your face scrambly. This of course happened in Guardians 2 when he and the crew travel through hundreds of them at a time. Everything seems okay, but then we get a post-credit stinger in which Ego himself goes to see Peter Quill, who he can catch working at a Dairy Queen. You might actually recognise this location from the opening of Guardians Volume 2, and it's where Ego left his seed. Not his seed like Peter, his seed, you dirty bugger. Anyway, the Watcher says that this might spell doom, and it's unlikely that Quill would be able to resist his dad without the Guardians at his side. By the looks of it, Peter has led a pretty humble life, and thus it's easy to imagine that he would be taken in by his father, who tells him he's an immortal god. We don't know what happens next, but I really hope that the series picks up this plot point down the road, and we explore the outcomes of what would happen to Peter if he wasn't picked up by Yondu. There's also a possibility that we could see this universe's Gamora, as the posters for What If have shown her wearing Thanos' armor. Perhaps she continued her father's mission in his absence, and it is possible that each episode will be linked in some way. I did a big theory breakdown on this based on the leaked information we have about the Doctor Strange episode, and also the fact that he meets Captain Carter. I can actually see Strange being sort of a Nick Fury-esque figure that travels around recruiting all of the heroes from alternate universes, and this could be why we see Star-Lord T'Challa in the trailers during the Avengers-esque shot. Beside him is Gamora in the Thanos armor, as well as Party Thor and what I believe is Killmonger. So this cliffhanger may be picked up down the line, and judging by the Hyundai ad we got, it may lead to one big multiversal war. Also, yeah, I said Hyundai on the last video, and YouTube hasn't let me forget. They'll never let me forget. I'm really sorry for saying Hyundai instead of Hyundai, guys. Really sorry, apologize. You can let it go now. Now the episode ends with a fitting tribute to Chadwick Boseman, and as a whole, I think this entry is a really great send-off. I did get early access to the first 3 episodes, and not to downplay what comes next, but this was by far my favourite of the 3. Whereas last time was pretty much just a retelling of the first Avenger, this took the premise and got really creative with it, and it shows the potential that What If has. There were a lot of people in my comments last week a bit annoyed that things didn't change that much outside of the ending, but this really showed the butterfly effect of how one minor difference can lead to a universe of changes. I love how Thanos and Gamora also changed up too, and it's nice to see the former fighting for the good guys. What do you mean Thanos was the good guy? Anyway, great episode that got me right in the feels, and obviously it's a very bittersweet one due to Chadwick's passing. I am excited to see him back in the series, but I do feel that this will very much be the episode from the season that he's remembered for, and rightly so. It brought with it the message of doing the best you can to improve the world and the universe around you, and that speaks volumes to Boseman's legacy and the kind of man that he was. He will of course be missed, and what a great send-off for not only the actor, but also the character of T'Challa as well. Now obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode, so make sure you drop them in the comment section below. We are running a competition right now and giving away 3 MCU box sets on the 30th of August. All you have to do to be in with a chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of episode 1, which will be linked on screen right now. We've also done a big breakdown of Captain America the First Avenger, so one of them, yeah, just whatever you want, whatever you fancy mate, it's up to you. If not, and you don't click any of those, thank you for sticking with me until the end of the video. I've been Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.